Hello everyone, this is NS Alters, and today I'll be showing you how I painted this Faithless Looting original art altar. So first, since we're painting original art across the whole card, we are going to mask it off using our masking tape, and then to fill in the cracks and just get those round edges, make sure everything's nice and clean, we're using the liquid latex. And that just really makes sure that we're getting paint only where we want it. And now that it's all dry, we can prime it. We're using a gray base. A gray is always a really good color choice. It covers up the darker parts of the card, helping to blend the borders, but also gray is a great place to start because your bright colors will still show through on it. And next, we're going to need a reference. So we're going to be doing the idol scene from Indiana Jones. That's some faithless looting if you ask me. So starting off, we're using our graphite paper technique to trace the image onto the card. And you can see that, wow. Yeah, it looks great. So now that we have the basic blocking with penciling done, just tracing that onto the card, we can start to put down the shadows. And this process here is almost the exact same as the penciling. It's not going to look very good. It's going to be pretty generic, but it really just keeps us focused when we start doing details later on. Make sure we don't put the eye in the wrong spot and end up looking like Picasso. And I must apologize. I realized halfway through painting this card that an artist by the name of Eric Klug, you may have heard of him, amazing artist, he did almost an exact same altar for Dak Faden, using the same scene as a reference, and I think subconsciously that's what made me want to do this, and then I realized halfway through that essentially this piece had already been done, so all reference goes to Eric Klug for this idea. So you'll see at this stage, even though I'm really just putting in the smallest amounts of detail, I'm already picking and choosing my colors. And here, in fact, I was getting a little annoyed that his face was too gray, and it's actually got quite a lot of orange in the reference photo, so I started just putting in some warmer tones there. But essentially from start to finish, you're going to need to think about your layers and your colors. So at this point, you can see some of the shadows are a little brown, some of them are almost solid black. And now that I have essentially the base colors all lined out, we're going to squeeze around a few more accurate colors. So putting in some browns and some yellows there. But the trickiest part about making any face look good is making sure that your blending is nice and smooth. So you'll see that my palette there, I'm constantly mixing in it. I'm using a lot of water on my brush and just bit by bit trying to always, whenever I'm adding a new color, I'm also spreading it around a little just to get that blend. So you might see in the time lapse here, I add a bit of paint, it's really sharp, but then it gets pushed around and it becomes less apparent. So just off the screen here, I have my tablet out and it has the reference image loaded up. You would never be able, well, I would never be able to get this amount of detail without a high resolution reference image. So just keep that in mind. I'm always looking back, making sure that things are in the exact right position. And from looking at my palette, you can tell that I'm really only using a few different colors. So what I have here is I have black, a dark brown, and then I have this like orangey yellow, a lighter yellow, and white. And every once in a while I grab a little bit of red just because my paints aren't quite orange enough to match the reference image, but just the tiniest amount there. But you'll see that I use the exact same palette for much of the card. And that will really help you maintain a consistency that will make your art feel much more accurate in the end. Just a little zoom in here as I detail the eyes. Putting in the shadows on the eyeballs. And then we go back to that same palette and we're touching up the ears now. And that ear is a little bright, so let's bring that down to some darker tones and deepen the shadows. Now moving on to the hand, using essentially all the same techniques listed above. You don't have to be as careful with things that aren't the face. Of course, always try to do your best when making art, but just you can rest easy knowing that if the fingers are slightly off or if the vein is in the wrong place, it's not going to throw you off. Your brain is just really good at catching small details and faces, so I usually like to put most of my effort there, and that's kind of why I painted the face first. But now that we have all those skin tones done, we can just move over to the jacket. And the jacket was really interesting because like half of it's in shadow there, the other half is his lapel, and then the folds in the leather add like a sort of silvery gray texture, which was fun to mix and color match just right. And then the hat was fairly simple. There wasn't a lot of color transitions in the hat, so I'm really just kind of texturing it because it is a felt hat, and then just putting on the shadows and the highlights on the bow tie, and you can call that done. So now we're mixing a new palette. You can see I swapped it around because we're going to start painting the idol. The color palette is actually quite similar, but I changed up the highlights. So I'm using a much brighter yellow, I'm using some harsh cadmium yellow, and all of these together are going to give it a more golden appearance rather than like the orangey brown skin tone appearance. Now the trickiest part about painting metals is that they're highly reflective. So you'll see that I'm painting in many thin layers so that the gradients and the blending of the glowing reflections come across a little more smooth. And you get a lot of weird reflections in reflective surfaces. So there's like a very dark black right beside a really bright highlight. So getting a smooth transition between those extremes was really difficult for me. And that was probably one of the more challenging parts of this one. But since the area was small, it took up less time than the face, for example. Now, painting in lots of these little thin lines, working in highlights. This part here, again, because it's not a human face, you can kind of get a little creative with it, still follow the reference image, but those little speckle highlights along like the hairs of the idol don't matter as much. We can get into the little stone tablet it's standing on. The reference image has it very colorful. There's lots of blues and greens from like the moss and mold that's been growing on it for centuries. So you see there's lots of blue here, and I'm mixing in some green, the same color of green that I used to tint his eyes, and I bring back that green here in the grass as well, and later on when I do some details in the background. So keeping your color palette consistent will make a piece feel more cohesive. Even if it's not an exact color match to the reference image, you can still make the piece feel more professional and more complete when you have consistent colors across the entire thing. So with the background, normally I like painting backgrounds first, but because the focus of this was Indiana Jones's face, I kind of just left it till the end, and the reference image has the background really blurry, so I could kind of just be loose with it at the very end. So to keep that blurry texture, the card paint is essentially staying wet the entire time. I'm mixing on the card. So we put in that dark background, then mixed in some grays. And then once we were happy with that, we can move on to the final steps. So we're scraping off the edges around the frames. We're grabbing our thin felt tip marker, and we're just darkening those outside of the frames. And then finally, signing the card. All that, and we're done. And there it is. One Faithless Looting. You know what? I think this one belongs in a museum. If you like this video, please consider subscribing. Or if you want to see me alter a specific card, leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching, and have a good day.